trying to justify this whole thing and admit you're in danger.
Who are you talking to right now? Who is it you think you see? Do you know how much I make a year? I mean, even if I told you, you wouldn't believe it. Do you know what would happen if I suddenly decided to stop going into work? A business big enough that it could be listed on the NASDAQ goes belly up. Disappears. It ceases to exist without me. No, you clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in. I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger. A guy opens his door and gets shot, and you think that of me? No. I am the one who knocks.
Now, let me ask you all a question. What really makes a person dangerous? A person powerful? Is it intelligence, wealth, experience, connections, or is it something more? Well, in the case of Walter White, necessity is what makes him powerful. As a man who cannot be replaced, no matter how much money or connections one has, is well and truly invincible. As if the main source of your own power stems from the ability to accumulate mass wealth, removing your largest source of income is highly ill-advised, especially if the reason for you building your empire is based on a do-or-die revenge plan, reliant on how much money you can make in order to buy the manpower to carry out said plan. Walter White becomes all the more invincible. But what happens the moment you come across a man whom you aren't essential to? A man who only values the lives of his family, a man who's just as strategically capable as you, bound by no law or set of morals that might prevent him from getting to you. Now let me break this down. All four characters who are going to be mentioned in this video, Gus, Mike, Walter and Lalo, are all very similar to one another in a way, especially when it comes to their strategic thinking, as one could argue that on any given day, these characters could all individually get the upper hand on one another. However, simple one-on-one scenarios isn't what I'm here to debate, as the majority of the time they lack any real context or meaning, but rather during the course of both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, who at their peak was the most dangerous. Now, Mike, only rivaled by Lalo, is undoubtedly the most dangerous when it comes to weapon and tactical proficiency, as on multiple occasions, Mike has easily been able to carry out murders on his own that would usually be assigned to much larger squads, such as the time where he saved Jimmy's life in the desert by murdering 6 people, a feat only topped by Lalo's butchery of the 6 Sicarios who had broken into his home. However, I do have to give Mike the upper hand here, as on every visible occasion where he and Lalo have been at odds, Mike has always wound up the victor, such as the time where he managed to escape from Lalo by placing chewing gum into the car park machine, which in a simple 1v1 scenario is all well and good. However, the problem Mike has, which in Lalo's case would be considered a strength, is the fact that he has a family, meaning that any action Mike takes would need to be utterly flawless in its execution. And what I mean by this is that if Mike were to say, take out Hector, all trails leading back to him would need to be non-existent, because if Mike were to leave behind any breadcrumbs for the rest of the Salamancas, his family would almost certainly be killed. And whilst one could argue that Mike is more than capable of being able to hide his family, you're forgetting the fact that in order for him to convince them to move, Mike would need to tell Stacy what is going on, and more importantly, what he really does. And although Stacy might agree in allowing Mike to hide them for the safety of Kaylee, she more than likely wouldn't allow Mike to be around her daughter when she finds out that he's a murderer, meaning that if Mike wanted to take out any major player, such as Gus, Walter or Lalo, he would seriously have to consider the possibility of gambling with the lives of his family, or even just sacrificing his relationship with them, which we all know Mike is far from willing to do. And in regards to the point brought up prior, when I said that Lalo having connections with his family is actually a strength, this is because each and every one of the Salamancas are more than capable of looking after themselves, meaning that if Lalo were to make a move which could result in action being taken against the Salamancas, he wouldn't have to worry so much about their safety, which unfortunately for Mike, is far from the case, and therefore places him as the least dangerous of the four. However, don't take this the wrong way, as if Gus were to want somebody dead, and he gave Mike the green light, you'd be dead. Now, once the ending of the episode Salute came around, which was the episode where Gustavo killed Don Eladio and all of his men, one could make the argument that at this point in time Gus was the most dangerous character the Breaking Bad universe had ever seen, as this was the moment where Gus was the closest to accomplishing his goal. And in regards to the point made at the start of the video, about Walter being a necessity to Gus, this was no longer the case, as the reason Gus set out to build his empire in the first place had now been fulfilled, and the major cog in his machine was no longer needed. Now I know you're probably wondering why I haven't got Gus as the most dangerous character in the show, and this is because at the time he still had one major weakness, which was his connection to Hector, and unfortunately for him, he was still up against one of the most strategically brilliant characters in the show, a character whom he never expected to make the move he made, and whilst one could argue that all of this could have been avoided if Gus just simply hadn't have told Walter that he was going to kill Hank, which wouldn't have forced Walter to spring into an immediate reaction, as how can one plan for something that he doesn't see coming? However, Gus partially underestimated Walt, which is extremely consistent in the show, as Gus never really viewed Walter as his equal, but rather just a cocky man with an overinflated ego, which to an extent is true, and in all fairness to Gus, for him to have the hindsight to predict that Walter may even get in contact with Hector, a weakness he himself couldn't have possibly known to be exploitable, never mind even aware of the fact that him having relations with Hector even was a weakness, is all too much to plan for, even for somebody as intelligent and forward thinking as Gus. And when it comes to his conclusion with Lalo, a triumph I've broken down multiple times on this channel, to me it's all very plot contrived and luck dependent, as why would somebody as intelligent as Gus just leave something as important as his life to chance? Now I do have to give Gus some credit, as he was still able to cover up this extremely plot contrived murder, fooling the likes of Don Eladio, who in my eyes didn't look too deep enough into the allegations, and I believe this to be for a reason, which is that Gus was the Don's biggest earner, therefore removing him from the equation would more than likely cost him a lot of money, which is something that Lalo really should have taken into consideration, as only leaving Hector as a contingency plan, and his word being your only proof, is far from enough. However, in all fairness to Lalo, his plan was almost so flawless that contingency in a non-plot contrived scenario shouldn't have been needed, but unfortunately it was, and therefore the feat still stands, that Gus was the man responsible for taking out the entire Salamanca family. Well, almost the entire family. Now, Walter was by far his most dangerous during the opening half of Season 5, as not only had he just murdered and toppled Gus's entire meth empire, but he had also just left a giant-sized distribution hole in the market, one that people were jumping at the chance to fill. However, a mistake a lot of people were making was that they were under the impression that because Walter no longer had Gus's distribution network, his meth would eventually fade into non-existence, as no matter how poor the quality of the meth they were making was, it'd still get sold, seeing as though there was more of it than Walt's. However, the problem with this line of thinking is that people weren't taking into account the fact that there was actually more money in buying Walt than there was in trying to take over the market, meaning that if a distributor were to have Walt on his side,
you'll earn more from that 35% than you ever would on your own.
And once people figured this out, Walter's worth became invaluable, as now he was able to find people who were willing to do the impossible in exchange for him showing them a portion of his skills, such as the time where he ordered Jack to take out 10 prisoners inside of 3 different jail cells in under 2 minutes, a strategical feat that in my eyes was never topped. Now, I know you're probably wondering, well Snaz, how doesn't this make Walter the most dangerous character in the Breaking Bad universe? Well, it's simple, as all of what I've just gone over only applies to an individual who values wealth over anything else, as in order for Walter to have you under his thumb, you need to value money, as to an extent, that's all he can offer you. And when you're dealing with somebody like Lalo, a character who would kill you without a moment's hesitation, no matter the value you're worth to them, all of this goes out of the window. And especially when you factor into account the fact that Walter was partially responsible for the death of not only Tuco, but also Hector, well, Lalo becomes all the more dangerous, as unlike Gus, or Mike, Walter isn't able to simply just convince Lalo to spare his life, as nor will he be given the time, or have the reasoning. And whilst one could just make the argument that Walter could simply just hire Jack to take out Lalo, this is far easier said than done. And once this inevitable hit takes place, Walter is now going to have to deal with a ghost. And without Gus, who even with all of the resources in the world, still couldn't manage to track down, what is ultimately going to be fighting a losing battle, one that he isn't going to be able to talk or buy his way out of, cementing Lalo as the most dangerous character in the Breaking Bad universe. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe and turn on post notifications, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.